All right. So, a funny story. This afternoon, I had some meetings at work, and I work 100% remote, and so had several of those phone calls, and then I actually got done early, and Nikki got off work early and came home, and we went to dinner with a couple of our children, and then came home for a few minutes, and I actually got some texts and some emails from some people at work. They wanted to jump on a quick meeting right away, and I'm thinking, well, I'm supposed to be at services, but this is a pretty important thing. I can be a few minutes late. And so we were going to jump on this call. And Sam comes walking into my office there and says, "Aren't you supposed to be teaching?" And I said, "No, there's no way I'm supposed to be teaching." And he said, "No, I've got the schedule right here. You're supposed to be teaching." And I had no clue that I was supposed to be teaching tonight. I have no idea how that happened. I went to Florida College for 1 year right after high school, and while I was there, I went to the Seminole Church of Christ and was asked in the second semester to teach a class there. And ever since then, so that would have been in the spring of 1992, so exactly 30 years, I guess. I don't think I have gone more than 2 trimesters without teaching in that period of time. And not once have I ever been unprepared for a class because I didn't know I was going to be teaching. I filled in for a few people last minute, but this is a first for me, so I'm sorry. But you get what you get tonight. Thankfully, Sam came there. Otherwise, I'm sure Darrell would have been calling me while I was on my meeting for work saying, "Hey, where are you?" I'm like, "Well, in meeting for work. What do you want me to do?" So we are going to be in 2 Kings chapter 4, starting out tonight. And I'm also shocked that out of all the Bible classes I've taught, we got here maybe 10 minutes early, and I keep a copy of all my Bible classes in a computer here at the building, and these 3 chapters, I think, are the only chapters from 2 Kings that I didn't have any material I could just real quickly grab. So even though we've studied it before, this will be the first time I've taught in here for sure with no slides, and the first time in a long time that we haven't had that kind of structure in here. So I do apologize, but we'll go ahead and read through this, and we'll get through it tonight as best we can. So, of course, starting here in chapter 4, we have this very familiar story of Elisha and the widow's oil. Just quickly to remind us of something Sam talked about on Sunday. So we know Elisha is Elijah's successor, right? And at the end there, as much as Elijah was trying to shake off Elisha when he knew he was leaving for his final journey, Elijah stayed with him and then made that very special request of him, which I thought Sam did a great job of covering. And there's actually a handout he put together in back where he would get that double portion of what Elijah had. So basically he's saying, I want to be your inheritor, just like he was his son, for all of your gifts for being a prophet and for doing miracles and for doing those kind of things, which it bears out in Scripture is exactly what happened, at least as far as what we have recorded. We have pretty much recorded that Elisha did exactly twice what Elijah did as far as prophecies and miracles and things like that. So we shouldn't be surprised when over the next several chapters we're going to have several of these recorded here. So, of course, starting here with the widow's oil, of course. So why is this going to be a big story here about the widow's oil? What is going on in the land of Israel that this is going to become such a big story here? Is everything going great? No, what's happening? There's a famine, right? Okay, so there's famine in the land, so people are going to be running out of food and those kind of things. And also Elisha is going to be on the run here because he is picking up that mantle of Elijah, and so he is going to be hunted. So he's going to be on the run here also. So we pick up in chapter 4 then. So it says, now the wife of one of the sons of the prophets cried to Elisha, your servant, my husband, is dead. You know that your servant feared the Lord, but the creditor has come to take two of my children to be his slaves. And Elisha said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me what you have in the house. And she said, your servant has nothing in the house except for a jar of oil. So he said, go outside, borrow vessels from your neighbor, empty vessels and not too few. Then go in and shut the door behind yourself and your sons, and pour into all those vessels, and when one is full, set it aside. So she went from him and shut the door behind herself and her sons, and as she poured, they brought the vessels to her. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another. And then the oil stopped flowing. And she came and told the man of God, and he said, go and sell all the oil and pay your debts, so you and your sons can live on the rest. So we're going to have this first miracle with a widow's son that's going to involve the oil here. And this is where basically she just keeps pouring, right? And the jar never runs out, okay? Now, we don't really know anything else about this widow here, just one of the other sons of the prophets, which sometimes means different things in scriptures. But yet, Elisha sees fit to go ahead and bless her and to give her enough of this oil to continue to live on. Now we're going to see in the next story here, Elisha and the Shunammite woman here. So beginning in verse 8, it says, one day Elisha went to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, behold, now I know that this is a holy man of God who is continually passing our way. Let us make a small room on the roof with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. So wherever he comes to us, he can go in there. One day he came and turned into the chamber and rested there. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, call this Shunammite. Then she called her and stood before him. And he said to him, say now to her, see, you have taken all this trouble for us. What is to be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? And he answered, I dwell among my own people. And he said, then what is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, well, she has no son, and her husband is old. He said, call her. And when she had called her, he stood in the doorway. And he said, at this season, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your servant. But the woman conceived, and she bore a son about that time the following spring, as Elisha has said to her. So here we see him being able to now gift this barren woman just because she has taken care of him so well, he gifts her with the ability to conceive a son. So let's see what happens here to that son. Beginning in verse 18 then, when the child had grown, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. And he said to his father, oh, my head, my head. And the father said to his servant, carry him to his mother. And when he had lifted him and brought him to his mother, the child sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. And then she called to her husband and said, send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may go quickly to the man of God and come back again. And he said, will you go to him today? It is neither a new moon nor a Sabbath. And she said, all is well. And he saddled the donkey and said to her servant, urge the animal on. Do not slacken for the pace for me unless I tell you. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. So what's interesting to me in this first part here is, of course, so her son has had some kind of migraine or perhaps a aneurysm of some sort, it seems like, right? He's complaining of a headache, and then that's enough to kill him. And so she makes this preparation by laying out her son on the bed and now preparing for this journey. But when she called to the father, what did she not tell the father? Hey, your son's dead. She just says, I'm going to go see the man of God. He doesn't seem to take anything out of the ordinary from that, other than this is not a normal day to go see him, right? And instead of saying, well, your son is dead, I'm going to go see what can be done, she just says, well, don't you worry about it. I'm going to go on this journey here, okay? So she set out to find him at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, his servant, look, there is the Shunammite. Run at once to meet her and say to her, 'Is all well with you? Is all well with your husband? Is all well with the child?' And she answered, 'All is well.'" Again, not saying really what's going on here. "And when she came to the mountain, the man of God caught hold of his feet, and came to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet. And Gehazi came to push her away, but the man of God said, 'Leave her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me.' Then she said, 'Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, do not deceive me?' He said to Gehazi, 'Tie up your garment and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him, and if anyone greets you, do not reply, and lay my staff upon the face of the child.' Then the mother of the child said, 'As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you.' So he arose and followed her. Gehazi went ahead and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. Therefore he returned to meet him and told him, 'The child has not awakened.'" Obviously, what was Gehazi expecting? An instant miracle, right? I'm going to take this staff, I'm going to lay it on the child, and he's going to rise up from the dead. Okay, but of course, that is not what happened here. When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and shut the door behind, and the two of them went and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child, putting his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, his hands on his hands, and stretched himself upon him. The flesh of the child became warm. And he got up again and walked once back and forth in the house, and he went up and stretched himself upon him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Then he summoned Gehazi and said, "Call this Shunammite." So he called her, and when she came to him, he said, "Pick up your son." And she came, fell at his feet, bowing to the ground, and she picked up her son and went out. What seems strange about this particular miracle to you, especially when we talk about the other miracles in the Bible where we see people being raised from the dead? I'm sorry? Okay, one more time. Okay. Yeah. So in a lot of miracles, when someone is doing that, it's just by the word, right? Who particularly had that power? Jesus did, right? Anything he spoke just came to be, okay? Other times, when we see people raised from the dead, they're called to come out. Or maybe we see them touching them or laying their hands on them here. But here we see him almost performing like mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, right? So he lays on him full face out, face to face, hand to hand, body to body. And then that kind of brings him back, but yet not completely. So what does Elisha have to do? Yeah, he's got to stretch, right? He's got to get up and he stretches and walks around the house and then comes back. And the second time he does that thing, now when the child is going to be revived. So this is, from all of the other miracles that we know of, from someone being raised from the dead, it's kind of unique in that we're told these actions that he was taking. Yeah. Yeah, sharing the body warmth, right? So a lot of the things that we would traditionally hold with kind of physical medicine, sharing the body warmth, doing the breathing, mouth to mouth. Sam?
This is actually a direct mirror of how Elijah raised the other widow's son. In 1 Kings 17, when the widow's son dies, he takes him up into the room. I read it here, verse 19, there, chapter 17 in 1 Kings. Elijah said to her, "Give me your son," and he took him from her in his arms, carried him up to an upper chamber where he lodged, and laid him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, why have you brought calamity even upon the woman whom I sojourned by killing her son?" And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." And the son was raised.
So when Elijah was raising the son, we have similar details, but not quite the same, right? He goes up into that room and lays him on the bed there and stretches out next to him and prays, and he is healed. Okay. So has Elisha received the power of Elijah? Yeah, absolutely. Yes. What's that? Oh, do I think the dad ever found out if the son had died? I don't know how you would keep that from him, but we're not given that detail, right? Whether he ever found out or not is not something we really know. Okay? I got to tell you, I hate this, not being prepared. This is eating at me inside. I'm sorry for that. This is a weird situation I've never been in before. Okay, any other comments about the healing of this Shunammite's son here? All right, let's go on then to verse 38. And Elisha came again to Gilgal when there was famine in the land, and as the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, he said to his servant, "Set on the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets." One of them went out into the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered from it his lap full of wild gourds. And he came and cut them up in the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. And they poured out some for the men to eat, but when they were eating of the stew, they cried out, "O man of God, there is death in the pot," and they could not eat it. He said then bring me flour. And he threw it into the pot and said, "Pour some out for the men that they may eat." And there was no harm in the pot. And a man named Baalshai, bringing the man of God bread his first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And Elisha said, "Give to the men that they may eat." But his servant said, "How can I set this before 100 men? So he repeated, "Give it to the men so that they may eat, for thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left." So he set it before them, and they ate, and they had some left according to the word of the Lord. So 2 miracles here happen in this same piece here. They're making this meal. There's a famine. So they go out and they just gather some local gourds of some kind. I don't know what they were, but they were apparently poisonous, right? Something that you weren't supposed to eat. So they go ahead and they make this stew, and as they start to eat it, then people start to get sick right away. And they realize that this is not something we're supposed to eat. So what is Elisha's miraculous, this is going to take care of everything? What are we going to throw in the pot? Some flour, right? So now, of course, that makes a whole ton of sense physically, is if we just add some flour to it, it's now no longer going to be poisonous. Of course, we know that's not the case, but they follow his word, and they go ahead and throw the flour in there, and then now all of a sudden the stew is no longer poisonous, and they're able to eat it. But now beyond that, as they're eating that stew, somebody else comes by to give them some other food, and what is Elisha's answer to them? Go ahead and give them some of that too, right? Well, now, not only was it poisoned the first time, but there was only enough for those who were there. So what's the second miracle going to be? Yeah, is going to be enough to feed them all, right? Very similar to when Jesus fed the 5,000, right? We have only these fishes and these loaves, but yet there was enough that they took up 7 baskets afterwards. The same kind of thing here. Not only is there enough to feed all of them and all of their visitors, but they have some left here. Again, just some random miracles that we see Elisha performing here. Okay. Don't really play a lot into the overall story of the divided kingdom, other than we know that God's power was active and working very much so during this time.
And it seems like, that kid had time to grow up to get to be at least 12, 13, whatever they consider an adult. So Elisha's been doing this a lot.
Oh, from the previous story? Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, this goes on for a while, right? For sure. We're not just And I would have had the exact timing from the last king we mentioned to the next king, but it's several years go on here where this is kind of filler detail about what's happening in the land while the kingdom is staying divided. Just some events that are happening. Okay?
It reminds me a lot of kind of the book of John.
All right, speak up.
The book of John makes it really clear that these miracles are kind of God's stamp of approval to inspire belief. And then with Elijah and Elisha, these two prophets that really parallel Jesus in a lot of ways.
Yes.
We're seeing God's power in them to kind of validate their message, but we're also seeing how they're not quite Christ. So even with the last resurrection, this idea that I can send a messenger to resurrect from all the way over here, we don't see that work. But in Christ, he can speak it from all these miles away, and it's this perfect power.
Yeah.
So it's cool just to see Elijah and Elisha both do some of these things that, again, narratively feels kind of off within the Kings and Chronicles at times, but it's giving us a good understanding of when these guys spoke to these kings or to these prophets of Baal, their lives have been this massive testament backing up.
Sure. Yeah. So his overall comment, for those who couldn't hear and those online, were really we needed to remember that the ability to do miracles like this was God's stamp of approval, right? That this is really my prophet. This is really someone who is delivering my message. So we see that for both Elijah and Elisha here, but also a great comment about the idea of, when Jesus asked, who do people think I am? What was one of those answers? Yeah, that's right. These guys right here, the prophet come again, okay? But yet what do we see in the differences between the miracles these guys were able to perform, but yet the miracles Jesus was able to perform? Even this healing, right? So he sends his servant with the staff. That doesn't work from afar. He gets there, and he still has to do some things to make it happen. What was Jesus able to do? How strong was he able to heal? He didn't even have to go there sometimes, right, to heal. He could just say from afar, it's done. Okay? That's right. That's right. Yeah, whenever the woman touched his garment without his knowing, right? Without his blessing for her to do it. And then he instantly realized the kind of power that had gone out of him. Okay? So we definitely see how they foreshadow Christ coming, but a great comment that they foreshadow him slightly imperfectly because they're not able to just speak it and these things happen. They have to do some of these things to invoke the power. Great comment, Brother Shutt. Yes?
It's interesting that though the focus of all of this study is on the kings and the great people, these miracles are on the little people, the small people, that show God's concern for them and not just the big picture.
Yeah.
Kings and empires.
Yeah. Carrie's comment was that when we look at the people that are receiving these miracles here, were these very important people and great people? No, these are just everyday widows and everyday people living in the land. Okay, so God's blessings were on them, even more so, perhaps, than the important people and the kings that were going on at the time there.
Another powerful thing is God spoke to them. God is blessing them with these abilities to show that God's hands in it. As they speak, God is being shown.
Yeah, that they're able to show God through the benefits that he gives them, the miracles that they give them able to do. That's right.
A lot of people come in the name of God that represent God that not represent
Yeah,
these stuff.
yeah. That's right. Yeah, Bobby's just saying, like we said earlier, that the miracles were there to give proof that these guys were really from God, right? As opposed to people who would say, yes, I have a message from God, and it really wasn't, right? Remember, we studied just a couple class periods ago about the guy who used to be a prophet and lies to the other prophet, but there's no evidence there. And so he really wasn't speaking from God in that instance. All right, let's move on to a story that we know probably much better here. In chapter 5, we're going to find the story of Naaman being healed of his leprosy here. And typically, I wouldn't take the time to read all of chapter 5, but we have time. So let's go ahead and read that quickly here, and we'll talk about it in some more detail. Chapter 5 and verse 1. Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man and master in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord, and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel, and the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you Naaman my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure this man of leprosy? Only consider and how he is seeking a quarrel with me." So when he went to the king misunderstands. And what does he think is expected of him? To perform the miracle, right? And he's really reading into this something that kings did all the time. If I send this guy to you that you're supposed to be able to heal and you don't do it, what does that give me an excuse to do? Now come attack you. That's right. Okay. So that's what the king of Israel is thinking here. Of course, we know that is not the case. The little girl who was captured didn't say, "Go to the king." She said, "Go to who?" Go to the prophet. That's right. Okay. So now let's continue then. Also notice just how much he brought with him. All that silver and all that gold and all the fancy clothes. What is he expecting he's going to have to do? He's going to have to pay. That's right. He's expecting it's going to cost him a lot of money. Okay. So verse 8. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come now to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, "Behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. Can you imagine the slight he feels? Okay? He didn't even come out to talk to me. What did he just do? He just sent a servant. Okay? Here he was expecting this great thing to happen, and he brought all this money and all these blessings, and he just kind of gets treated like a servant himself here. I can understand, right? It's not exactly what he was expecting. But his servants came near and said to him, "My father, it is a great word that the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. How much did doing the word of Elisha make sense to Naaman? No sense, right? It made absolutely 0 sense that this is going to work. He didn't do any kind of magic. There's no mumbo-jumbo language, no waving of his staff, no touching me. He just said, "Go down to this dirty river and dip 7 times in the dirty river. That isn't going to do absolutely anything for me." But of course, finally, he wakes up whenever he's reminded, "Hey, this is all he asked you to do is go and do this. Didn't he tell you if you went and did this, you'd be clean? Isn't this what you came here for?" And so he goes down and he actually does it, and then he is healed there. Every time I read this story, I think about the idea of baptism. Obviously, we can't get away from that, right? how much does that make sense to us? Even Paul says, when you go in the water, what do we tend to think of that as? Washing what? The body, right? We're just thinking we're washing the dirt. Paul says that's not anything to do about what the real baptism is. It's not the washing of the flesh, it's the washing of what? Of the soul. Okay? Same thing here. Did the Jordan River, is that really what cured Naaman of his leprosy? No, it was his what? His obedience, that's right. Okay? If Elisha had told him, go find this little dirty puddle over there and dip your hand in it 10 times, that would have been what would have cured him. Okay? It was the act of obeying and showing that he was going to be obedient to God that is what came through there. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and continue to read there in verse 15. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all of his company, and he came and stood before him, and he said, behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he said, as the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. I love the he's and the hims, and you got to kind of keep it straight here, right? Okay. Then Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth, for from now on your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. In this manner may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And he said to him, go in peace. So pretty strange exchange here. Of course, not strange to us that Elisha wouldn't take the money, because Elisha doesn't take the money from the kings. He doesn't take the money from anybody. He is literally doing it. What was the reason he said, I'm going to go ahead and heal this man? So that everyone will know there is still a what in Israel? A prophet of God. That's right. Okay. So that was the reason for doing it. It wasn't for this material blessing. So he refuses that. And why does Naaman request for 2 mule loads of dirt? What do you think that's all about? Yeah, so when you think about it, at the time, what do people tend to associate their gods with? The land that they're in, right? Even he says there is no God in all the earth but the God that is in where? Is in Israel, okay? So he wants to take a little bit of Israel with him when he leaves, okay? A lot of people make that mistake about Jehovah. Even whenever the Israelites sometimes were fighting, what did their enemies think about Jehovah? He was only a God of the what? A God of the hills, a God of the mountains. If we can bring them down on the plains, then our gods will be stronger. Was that true? No. The Egyptians thought that in the land of Egypt, our gods are stronger than the God of the Hebrews. And we can prove it through all these things, magic things we can do. But what did God end up showing them? There's only one God who rules, okay? And it doesn't matter where he's at, God is going to be the ruler of that, wherever he goes, over all the earth. But then we see this strange request from Naaman. What does he know is going to happen when he goes back home? What does he know he's going to have to do? Yeah, he knows he's going to have to go worship in the house of Rimmon, which is the god of Syria. And he knows that he's going to have to go in there because his king relies on him. Apparently the king was old. And so he actually leans on his arm when he goes into worship. And he says, when the king goes in there and bows down to worship, what do I have to do? I have to bow down to worship. But what is Naaman really saying? I may be doing these acts of worship, but what do I know is really happening here? There's only one God, and that is the one God who is where? He thinks in Israel, okay? So now you put that all together, and he's saying, if I take this dirt with me, I can take a little piece of Israel with me back home. And so now whenever I have to go do these things that I'm not really worshiping, I'm just going through the acts, I can come home and I can worship who? I can worship Jehovah. Okay? Now, of course, we would probably say today, hey, there's no way you can do that because what are you doing? You're giving honor to a false god. But what's Elisha's answer to him? Yeah, go ahead. Okay? Because it's not really but up to Naaman, up to Elisha to decide that. Who is it up to? It's up to God to decide. Okay? So apparently God is going to be okay with Naaman doing what he has to do whenever he goes back home, because Naaman has already made this great statement of faith, which we don't know, of course, but I'm assuming this changed the course of his life. I mean, it wouldn't mind if you had this.
Well, and I think Naaman may have already kind of known about God or had some favor from God, because it says he was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So her point is that perhaps what we see earlier in the chapter is that Naaman was given victories by Jehovah, right? But the question is, did Naaman know that? I don't think we see that in Scripture here. Does God give victories to other nations in Scripture? Yeah, all the time, right? So think about during the whole period of the Judges, we have at least 8 cycles, maybe 10, depending upon how you count a cycle, where the children of Israel are disobedient and they start worshiping idols. And what does God do?
Raises up a nation to.
Yeah, it literally says he raises an oppressor and gives them victory, right? Okay. Think about when they were taking the land. They took the city of Jericho, and according to what we read, we probably think nobody died. They were able to successfully take that walled city without losing a single man. Then they go to attack these tiny little city of Ai, and what happens? Yeah, they lose 30 men. Today we would think 30 men, that's nothing. But, oh no, we lost. That was the whole thing. We lost. God gave the victory to someone else. So we do see that in Scripture where God raises these nations to do his will, where perhaps they didn't even know it. So I don't know if we would say that Naaman recognized that God is the one that gave him those victories in Syria or not, but possibly.
He was also quick to go on the word of the little servant.
Yeah, that is true. He was quick to go on the word of this little girl that was captured, although I tend to think of, I don't mean to say that, obviously, this little girl wasn't a trickster, and obviously Naaman was not a false prophet. But think about people who are sick today, and they hear, some potential folk remedy, or they hear some person is able to heal. What are they willing to go through to try to get that healed? All right? That's the whole way a lot of these people scam money, is if I can't count how many times I've seen on TV, just send me $20 and I'll send you this vial of healing water that will take your sickness away. Okay?
She was Naaman's wife's handmaid.
That's right. So maybe it wasn't the little girl that convinced him. Maybe it was Naaman's wife, right, who convinced him. Hey, this girl says try this, you ought to go. That's a good point, John. That's a good point. Okay. So let's finish out this story then, picking up there the rest of verse 19. But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, "See, my master has spared this Naaman the Syrian in not accepting from his hand what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." Interesting to me, his point isn't, we didn't get a bunch of gold. What is his point? Naaman got away without having to do what? You don't have to pay anything. Okay? That's going to bear out here in the rest of this story. So Gehazi followed Naaman, and when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from the chariot to meet him and said, "Is all well?" And he said, "All is well. My master has sent me to say, there have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men, the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing." And Naaman said, "Be pleased to accept 2 talents," which is really saying what? Now, I'm happy to give it to them, right? I mean, he was ready to give him a whole bunch more. And so now just to give him two talents and 2 changes of clothing, we can do that, of course. And he urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing and laid them on 2 of his servants, and they carried them before Gehazi. And when they came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in the house, and he sent the men away, and they departed. And he went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" And he said, "Your servant went nowhere." Now he knows he's in trouble. Okay? What is probably a bad thing to do to a guy who is a prophet? To lie. He knows you're going to be lying right away here, but he knows he's caught here, so he tries to get out of it. But Elisha, said to him, "Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchard and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants?" Now, all of those other things are not mentioned, right? But what's his point? We didn't do this for what? Yeah, we didn't do this for riches. We didn't do this for gain. Exactly here, okay? "Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever." So he went out from his presence a leper like snow. Once again, we see instant salvation, but yet instant damnation on the other side, right? So the one who was faithful receives the cleansing, but yet the one who was unfaithful receives the dirt, receives the filth, receives his just rewards here. Now, sometimes we might think that might be a bit harsh, right? One mess up and now he's cursed and all of his descendants are cursed that they're going to have of leprosy, but yet it was the will of God for that to be. Okay. Naaman's such an interesting story just because of I see myself in Naaman so much, right? I wish sometimes that God would give me some great checklist of all these awesome things that I could go do, right? You guys have probably all heard me say I would have loved to have been a general in one of those armies and God saying, "Hey, go fight my battles for me." Man, I wish God would ask me to be that guy. But that's not what he asked me to do. What did he ask me to do? Live your life and follow me. A simple thing, but sometimes that's not enough. I want these great, grand gestures that will show how faithful I am and how much I'm able to give up and what I'm willing to do. But yet that's not what God asks us to do. In fact, Jesus said, when you pray, don't do it in the streets where everybody can see these great deeds. When you pray, do what? Go in your closet where nobody's going to know. Okay? Same thing as saying to Naaman, instead of doing this great journey to these awesome, mountain-fed, crystal-clear rivers, no, just go over here to the Jordan that's right there. It's dirty and running with mud and just dip yourself right there. But yet that is what saved him there. It's just such a powerful story to me.
Question, wasn't Elisha's ultimate goal to evangelize people about the character and power of God?
Elisha's ultimate goal here, or?
So, aren't these really just evidences that Elisha was given a job of evangelizing people to convince them that God was real, and that they should have belief in God?
That's definitely the reason for the miracles, is to prove that he was a man from God and that what he's speaking and that his trying to bring the nations back to God, right?
Both Jew and Gentile, right?
Yeah.
That's another foreshadowing of Jesus.
Yeah, that's another foreshadowing. I think you're right. Yeah, that's right. Okay, we have one more miracle that we are supposed to cover today in the beginning of chapter 6, the axe head, which is again just kind of one of them random stories showing the the power that Elisha had here. And we might actually get dinged on by the bell, but we'll go ahead and read this quickly since we've been reading the whole time tonight. Now the sons of the prophet said to Elisha, "See, the place where we dwell under your charge is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, and each of us get there a log, and let us make a place for us to dwell there." And he answered, "Go." So we're too crowded here. We need more space. So they're going to go build houses down by the river. Then one of them said, "Be pleased to go with your servants." And he answered, "I will go." So he went with them, and when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. But as one was felling a log, his axe head fell into the water, and he cried out, "Alas, master, it was borrowed." And the man of God said, "Where did it fall?" And then he showed him the place, and he cut off a stick and threw it in there and made the iron float. And he said, "Take it up." So he reached out his hand, and he took it. Again, kind of almost a strange use of the power of God, right? Just to recover an axe head. How much could that have cost? Not a terrible amount. I mean, maybe somewhat dear to them, but he's worried because he borrowed it from somebody and now he can't take it back. And rather than just replacing it, we see this miracle where he throws in a stick. Apparently the stick does what? The stick sinks and the iron floats, and he goes and picks up the axe head. Okay. And what's interesting to me about this story is that who is that showing Elisha's power to? His followers already, right? There's not even anybody around to really see, look at what Elisha's done. It's just people who are his followers already. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. Again, I apologize that happened, but Ben, I think, is next on Sunday, is that right? Okay.